Hi there, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to Reading Aristotle's Politics. Today we are continuing our discussion of kingship, that's particularly the so-called three logoi of the Pambasileia in Book 3, the last chapters of Book 3 in that sense. Last time we met, we took that chapter 14, which begins what we call the first argument of this debate between this idea of the Pambasileia, the king overall, the king who rules absolutely overall. And we'll continue there today on this chapter 16, which continues the second, what I call the second logoi. I dealt with this in my 2004 book, Aristotle's Best Regime, Part 3, which deals with these three things in detail. So, for those of you who wish to, want to add something about looking at the argument in a little more detail, you can turn to that. But let's look at the text today. Let's go look at what it's saying here. Chapter 16. The argument has now come around to the king, who acts in all things according to his own will. So not only law, his own will, right? And thus must be investigated. So the king who rules over this. Now, the king, so called, who rules according to the law is not, as we said, a kind of kingship. Now, here at chapter 80 is reading Basileus with the manuscript as conjectural politeus of regime, right? This is the idea. Dreninger argues that this is the idea. This is a distinction between kingship and the regime. This is strongly implied, but not precisely said at line 15. Okay, in verses 2, in chapter 15. So let's continue back here. That, in other words, this king is one who's not ruling by law. The rulings of any kingship by law is really not law; it's a Spartan kingship. That goes all the way to the beginning. That we have choices between the absolute rule, which is a regime, a type of regime, versus a kingship as a form of an institute. In other words, it's an office of law. If it's an office, it's a product of law and legislation, and therefore it's subordinate to regime. And it's something common to all regimes, a question within all regimes. But if we're talking about the regime of this, the question of who should rule, in terms of the regime question, then we're looking at this question of one who absolute rules, and that therefore he does not rule by law. The argument is anyone who rules by law is really like the Spartan kings, and therefore not truly a king. The one who's truly king is that he is ruling, he himself is ruling, but he does not rule with law. So that's interesting in that sense. So therefore, this is then what distinguishes the traditional thing that distinguished kings and tyrants was that the tyrant was someone who ruled, who came into power illegally or illegitimately, right? So let's continue here. There can be permanent general in all regimes, in democracy or aristocracy, for example, and the many give one person authority over administration. There is an office of this sort at epidamus, for instance, and someone of lesser and one of somewhat lesser extent at opus as well. So therefore, this is a generalship, appointment, executive. What do you call the president? The executive officer, right? The executive officer, the one who exercises authority. Concerning so-called absolute kingship, on the other hand, this is where the king rules in all matters according to his own will. Some hold that this is not even in accordance with nature for one person among all citizens to have such authority, where the city is constituted out of similar persons. So therefore, this cannot be. In other words, some argue that you cannot have a person that way. This person of this case. Now let's look at this. The notes here at 81. Rule over all matters. 81. He's saying reading Panta the manuscript and reading Panta with the manuscript rather than Rudernscher over all persons, over all persons, right? And this is the idea. And then the other thing is here, according to his own will, and this is again tied to. I think he's going to again following Shishfields, accepting Lucana at this point, and suspecting a Lucana that something's missing. Something is missing here. And then last is this point here in 83, right, which yields us here for this question of different possible interpretations. For one person to have authority over citizens, as is generally understood, right? But the phrase Krios Pantron means ruler, Pantron, seems regularly used elsewhere. This is in chapter 14:3, in the sense of having authority over all matters. In a limitation of kingly sovereignty over persons is nowhere discussed by Aristotle. So in other words, the limitation of kingly sovereignty over persons is not discussing, but having all matters, having authority over all matters, not over all persons in a sense. Having, in other words, therefore, we have a situation here, right? Can this be the case? If the city is constituted of similar persons, can there be someone who exercises, it is something that is not according with nature that one person is to have all authority like this? The idea is that if we're all similar, we're not going to accept the authority of one person who always had that authority. We're going to want to share the rule, okay? Otherwise, we won't. No, in other words, the only way we would accept it is that they were so virtuous and so great, and therefore so dissimilar that we would recognize that they should rule us, right? But that's the case where we're similar. This is not going to be a situation where any one person should rule us like a master, okay? That should be like a ruler, natural ruled. So again, the whole question of the Pam Basileia addresses the question of the naturally ruled and naturally ruling. If there's going to be a naturally ruled and naturally ruling person, of course, it's going to be not by coercion; it's going to be by consent. We're going to agree to it. We're going to submit to it. We will have to do this by this. And this is that point. Now it continues. For in the case of persons similar by nature, justice and merit must necessarily be the same according to nature. And if it is harmful for their bodies, if unequal persons have equal sustenance and clothing, it would also be for their souls if they are equal in what pertains to honors, and similarly, therefore, if equal persons have what is unequal. So therefore, the question is that if everyone is similar, it's going to be very problematic to give one person all the honors and all the authority. It'll be unjust. So that the claim that this person should rule over absolutely can only come that he is, in other words, his virtue is so preeminent that he is completely he or she or it is far superior to the rest, okay, and is unequal, and therefore he's, in other words, and therefore only can be just if that there's inequality. If there's not an inequality, then there's a problematic just. So hence, continue here, hence it is no more just for equal persons to rule than to be ruled. And it is therefore just that they rule and be ruled in turn. So here is the argument. This is what political argument is. Political rule, and the idea of citizens, only occurred. There's a similarity of, in other words, they have to share something. The idea that there's a koinonia that they're sharing, a community together that they're sharing, and there have to be similarities. That there's no great inequality of who they are as members of the community. That they all share something. They're all relatively similar to each other or same to each other or members of the community. They share in that thing together, and therefore it has to be a concept of being ruled in turn, because no one, in other words, that they're given that they're so equal, in other words, they're given that they're relatively equal to each other, and there's not this vast inequality which would legitimize one ruling over and one being ruled by the other. That this is what occurs here. Now it continues, but this is already law, right? For the arrangement of ruling and being ruled is law. Okay, this brings in the law, right? Again, here, he brings in law. Law is the concept here, that the definition of the citizen of law is an institution of law. He seems to suggest. So an this is the law coming in. The law gets its argument here. This thing. Accordingly, to have laws rule is to be chosen in preference to having one of the citizens do so, according to the same argument. And if it should be better to have some of them rule, these must be established as law guardians and as servants of the laws, for there must necessarily exist certain officers by which persons rule and not law. There was this idea but they deny that it is just for this one that that it is just that this one person rule, at least when they're all similar. Okay, so this article, this whole paragraph here, is about the question of, well, wait a minute, it's um, uh, if the law is going to rule, we have the law rule, right? And the law rules because they're mostly equal, right? And that, but it's sometimes best because the laws may not be completely useful. There's going to be some things that the laws cannot speak about, and that therefore we need to have someone who can correct the laws. These are the law guardians, right, and the servants of the laws. And the question is, there shouldn't be one. There should. The question is, should there be many, right? Because it says there must necessarily exist certain offices by which persons rule not law. But they deny that it's just that this one person will. In other words, we argue, like we can agree that there needs to be a office. A person might have to, a bunch of people. An office must be held, but it should not be held by only one person by themselves, right? Now it continues. At least, now, again, because we're all similar. All people of the community is similar. For that matter, as regard those things which the law is not held to be capable of determining, a human being could not decide them either. In other words, a single human being. I think the single should not. Rather, the law. In other words, the law educates, especially for this, and hands over what remains undetermined by law itself to be judged and administered by the most just decision of the rulers. Now, this is 84. This is an allusion to the oath sworn. Again, this is an allusion to the oath sworn to the jurors. The jurors are going to have to do this. In other words, they are to make the most just decision. The jurors actually decide the law. They look at the law, and then they look at the case, and they look at the law does not simply just apply itself. It needs human intermediaries to bring it about and execute it and implement it. It's the problem. Implementation is the gap between the letter of the law and the action of the law in returns to what is being done. So therefore, it is an implementation always requires human action. It is not self. Law is never self. The letter of the law is not always self-enforcing. Further, now let's continue here. Further, it allows them to make corrections in cases where they hold something to be better than the existing laws on the basis of their experience, right? So therefore, this is the jurors and the rulers can they see a situation where the existing law is not going to be beneficial. They can alter the law, correct the law so that it produces the beneficial for the city in that sense. Not necessarily always changing the law, but maybe correcting the law in that sense, right? Now it continues. The one who asks law to rule, therefore, seems to be asking God and intellect alone to rule, while the one who asks man adds the beast. In other words, again, this is the argument of the laws, that therefore the one who argues for the law, that the laws rules, arguing for that the God and intellect rule. In other words, it's the laws are intellect without passion. Whereas if the one who asks for a man to rule, he's asking that he adds the beast, the irrational, to this question. Desire is a thing of this sort, a beast, right? The spirited perverts ruler, spiritedness, thumos, this perverts rulers, and the best man. In other words, it perverts both rulers, archon, those of rule, and the best man. Hence, law is intellect without appetite. And the argument for and then he goes, now this is not proper, and then this is the other point. This repeats what he said elsewhere in book 2 about hippopotamus. And the argument from the example of the arts may be held to be false. That it is poor thing, for example, to heal in accordance with written rules, and one should choose instead to use those who possess the art, right? For those who do not act against reason on account of affection, but they earn their pay by making the sick healthy. But those in political matters are accustomed of acting in many manners with a view to spite or favor. In other words, the doctor is the artisan is no. In other words, he's basically saying that the example that politics is not simply an art. It's not merely an art. It is not the art of exercising a technique. A technique, the doctor who's exercising technique, his job is to make the person healthy. But the problem with politics is not merely that we're trying to make the citizen well, but also because he says that those in political office are accustomed to acting in many manners with a view to spite or favor, that harm, help, and benefit and harm. In any case, if doctors were suspected of being persuaded by a person's enemies to do away with him for profit, he would be more inclined to seek treatment from written rules. In other words, you don't trust the doctors. If you don't trust the doctors, if you think the doctors are going to be acting against you, you want the doctors to be guided by law, rules, and regulations. So therefore, this is the idea that we don't trust our rule. The question is that human nature is such that we maybe should be suspect of those who rule over us, right? Moreover, doctors bring in other doctors for themselves when they're sick, and trainers other trainers when they are exercising. The assumption is that they are unable to judge what is true on account of judging both their own case and while they are in a state of suffering. Okay, so in other words, there are two things. I'm in suffering. But also it's very difficult to judge your own situation when you're suffering, and also judging when you're your own case. Okay, these two things make it difficult. That's why you bring in others, right? Both in terms of because the doctor and also the trainers, right? So it is clear that in seeking justice, they are seeking impartiality, for law is impartiality. Okay, that's the argument. So law is the kind of impartiality, one that allows you to not get in law is kind of a neutral position. The rule of law is kind of a neutral position where partisanship is not supposed to take place, right? Further, laws written on unwritten customs are more authoritative and deal with more authoritative manners than those based on written rules. So it is safer for human beings to rule than laws based on written rules. This is not the case for laws based on custom. So he's saying that the technical thing, this technical laws, laws based on customs allow for more flexibility and evolution. Written laws, because they're like sit in writing, they have a kind of they're kind of maybe less flexible. So therefore, the customary laws, the laws based on custom, the laws based on habit, the laws based on the ways of unwritten laws. The unwritten laws are the laws that are more are what? These are the ones that are more authoritative than written laws. The reason why, again, because the written ones are less flexible, and there becomes a gap between what the law says and what works, right? Moreover, it is not easy for one person to survey many things, right? So it's very, again, one person themselves. These are the arguments by law against a man, a single ruler making. In other words, it's not easy for one person to survey many things. Accordingly, there will be a need for a number of persons to be selected as rulers under him. But then what difference is there between having them present right from the beginning and having one person select them in this manner? So therefore, this question is, given that even the king is going to have advisors and people like under them, it's going to be very difficult. But why do we have to have the king select them? Why can't they be there at the beginning? Why can't we have a situation of these advisors and peoples having these things, right? Further, again, this is a question of offices, really, the argument here, right? Further, there is what has been said earlier. If it is just for the excellent man to rule because he's better, two persons are better than one. Thus saying, two going together in Agamemnon's prayer for 10 such counselors for myself. Right? This is again 85. This is from Homer's book 10. Even now, there are officers that of jurors, for example, which they have authority to judge concerning some matters that the law is unable to determine. For in these cases of those it is able to determine, at any rate, no one would dispute that the law would be the best ruler and the judge concerning them. In other words, if the law can handle it, the land could do it. Then the law would be the best judge. It's impartial. It's not. It's not a person in that sense. But then the problem is when it can't deal with it, we would rather have many jurors, right? Not just one. But because some things cannot be accomplished by the laws, in other words, sorry, but because some things can be encompassed by the laws and others cannot, the latter causes the question to be raised and pursued whether the rule of the best laws is more choice worthy than that of the best man. So therefore, because laws can't be done everywhere, so therefore, is it what's better? Is it best man or the best laws? For to legislate concerning matters of deliberation is impossible. In other words, you can't deliberate. In other words, you can't deliberate about. You can't make laws about what needs to be matters of deliberation. This is not. This is again something he talks about in Book 6 of the politics, the ethics. Sorry, Book 6 of the ethics about prudence, about deliberation. Deliberation can only be, but it's you can't kind of make laws. You can't put into writing and principle state things, uh, 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 aspects of deliberation, if I remember correctly. So that line for legislation concerning matters of deliberation is possible. Now, the counter argument is not that it is not necessary for a human being to judge in such matters, but rather that there should be many persons instead of only one. So, in other words, that the argument, their counter argument, the counter argument of the argument of the laws is not that there should be no one should do that, but rather there should be many rather than few. For every ruler judges beautifully, finely, nobly, right, kalos, if he's been educated by the laws. And if it would perhaps be held to be odd if someone should see better with two eyes, judge better with two ears, and act better with 2 feet and hands than persons would with many. So therefore, this is the idea is that everyone has their own, and therefore there's for every ruler judges finally if he had been educated by the laws, right? And it would perhaps be held to be will be odd if someone should see better with two eyes, judge better with two. In other words, in other words, and act better, than many persons would with many. Okay, as it is, a monarch creates many eyes for themselves, and ears and feet and hands as well. For those who are friendly to their rule and themselves, they make co-rulers. If they're not friends, they will not behave in accordance with the monarch's intention. But if they are friends to him and his rule, the friend is someone similar and equal. So if he supposes these should rule, he necessarily supposes that those who are similar and equal should rule similarly. The argument of those who dispute against the kingship are then essentially these. So he ends up. He says in chapter basically much of 16 has been the argument for the laws. So if the argument 14 was kind of pro kingship, but kind of pro kingship, the basic thrust of 16 has been the arguments for the laws. we're going to stop here. We're at the end of the chapter. If you have any questions, please put them in below, and I will respond to them. I think this is a very difficult. This is a very difficult chapter in that sense. These parts are kind of connected, and we talk about this. Again, I will point to my book, Aristotle's Best Regime, in LSU 2003, 2004, where in book third part where I deal with these sections. If you have any comments or questions, please about this chapter, please put them below, and when I see them, I will respond. If you liked it, like it, share it. If you didn't like it, explain why in comments. Maybe we can address it, and I can respond or maybe improve. If you're not a subscriber, please do think about subscribe so that you get the new notifications and we do new things. If you're please encourage your friends, share the video. If you liked it, some other videos, share it. Encourage friends that might be interested in it, and get them. Try to encourage them to subscribe. I like to grow this a little bit, and you can follow me on the social media links below. There are again, I'm going to now. This is the shilling part. YouTube is changing the way it's doing things. It's charging. Yes, I'm doing this. I'm doing this again. This is like I enjoy doing this. This is kind of like I want to add things to this to improve the quality of what's out there on the web, because there's a lot of junk on the YouTube and other things. And I think I can add something. This is worth having on the web. But now, as these continue, what's happening is the size of what you can have on the web for free is shrinking because Google needs to make money, man. And I'm going to have to make cuts. So of course, I'm going to try to. I'll probably spend money on it, but I would like to. You want to help? You can help. I admit that Patreon and Subscribestar is one way to do it. But then again, you're going to say, but you don't do anything for them. So you're giving this away anyway, so why should we help, right? This is the classic problem of the tragedy of the commons, right? The free rider problem. This is maybe I'm not. Maybe I should have made this all exclusive stuff. Some people do this. I understand this is how you make money, right? But I hope maybe someone be generous and try to help, and that'd be great. You can do that through Subscribestar, Patreon, whatever. Or you can just find me and you send me a Google Mail. You get my Google Mail. You can see Clifford Bates. You can send someone Google. Who knows? Another way you can do it is buy my book. Buy this book. Those of you studying the politics, you can get a more or so on the politics. This is kind of a Cliff's Notes, notebook on Aristotle's politics, which is it's a workbook. It's a kind of a guide to go through the politics, to study with it, going through the different books of this and chapter by chapter. At the end of every chapter, there's some place to put notes in it. It's not a commentary or interpretation. It's a study guide. It gives highlights of the helps students, helps readers to understand a guide through the very complex nature of Aristotle and his politics. Again, doing what we're doing here a little bit. So that's it. I hope you guys have a good day, and thank you for being here, and see you again tomorrow. Bye-bye.